Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is wonderful to have your company for another episode of the show. Now, my guest today is someone who I really admire a great deal, and I'm talking about Scott K. Harris. And Scott has got an extraordinary background. He's grown up in a dental family. His dad was an orthodontist, his grandfather's a dentist, his uncle's a dentist. And Scott himself went into the army and learned a lot about commercial flying, a lot about skydiving. And in particular, we're looking at skydiving and how that's such a metaphor for life, taking that leap of faith. But it's also about what happens before the leap. What are the preparatory things that we need to be able to do? And what are the plans we need to have in place? How do we mitigate risk? But once we've taken that leap, it's about having the ultimate focus and being able to eliminate all other distractions so that we can apply our intellectual resources, our emotional resources to achieve the specific outcome that we're seeking to achieve. And so this conversation is a really interesting conversation, and Scott's fantastic. If you want to find out more about Scott, you can head across to his website, scottkharris.com. Also, grab a copy of his book, which is available on Amazon and Audible as an audiobook, and equally from his website as well. And the book is titled Leap Forward. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a great read. It's an easy read in the sense that it's digestible. It's not something you need to labor over, but it's got tons and tons of pearls of wisdom in there, and I'd encourage you to get a copy of it. Now, if you're a practice owner and you want to take your practice to the next level, if you want to take that next leap in your business, then I'm going to encourage you to come across to the Savvy Dentist Facebook group. All you've got to do is head to Facebook, jump into the search bar, type Savvy Dentist, answer a few questions, and we'll invite you into that group. And in that group, we're going to be providing you with training, some resources, and some tools to help you elevate your practice, to elevate your life, and do the things that you really care about, whether it's having a greater income, having more free time, and ultimately greater freedom of choice. Then if that's for you, then come and join us. We'd love to see you there. But for now, let's hear from Scott. Scott, thank you so much for joining us on the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have you here, and you're joining us all the way from Portland, Oregon. How are you today? It's morning for me, afternoon for you. How's your afternoon?
Excellent. We've got some great weather here today.
Well, that is something that you can claim that we cannot. Unfortunately, here in Australia, we've got a bit of a weather event where we've got some flooding issues. So please send us your blue skies. We would very much like them for a while. Scott, You've got a very interesting background. You're a very well-known skydiver. You've had a background in the army. You've had a background as an engineer, and you grew up in a dental family. So I'm really curious to talk a little bit about your background, because it is probably, like the rest of us, a multifaceted, long and winding road. And I'm curious to ask you, a little bit about that background and how you got to this point in your life where you're now talking to people about overcoming obstacles, overcoming challenges, and taking the big leaps of faith in their life. So how's that journey been for you?
It's been a lot of fun. I really didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with myself. I didn't fit in too well in school when I was a kid. Without having a better plan, I volunteered for the U.S. Army when I was 17 years old in 1975 at the tail end of the Vietnam War. This was not a popular decision among my peers at the time. We all fancied ourselves hippies. It was the best decision I ever made. It changed my whole life. While I was in the Army, I took up skydiving, and that changed my whole life. Being in the Army taught me a lot about myself, what I could do, how much I liked responsibility and challenge to a certain extent. And then when I took up skydiving, I learned the drumbeat of my life, so to speak. It was a whim to jump out of an airplane. It was a sport club on the base. It didn't have anything to do with the Army per se, but jumping out of an airplane was, of course, terrifying to begin with, as it would be for anyone. Anybody who isn't afraid of something like that is either a liar or nuts. But overcoming that challenge and becoming an accomplished skydiver was a big deal. And it taught me, how much I enjoy facing challenge of any kind. And embracing challenge is the best way forward. It's the best way of controlling your own fear and performing at your highest level. After I got out of the Army, I went to college. I became an engineer. I worked on ships, and from there, power plants and water treatment plants as a consulting engineer. I'm currently, I'm a builder. I inspect commercial buildings for people who are buying it. And I'm trying to help other people learn to face challenge in order to perform at their highest level, as I have. At different times of my life, I have achieved a certain modicum of greatness in my own chosen area. I won the National Collegiate Skydiving Championships in 1978. Just a little while after getting out of the Army. And in 1998, I won the National Amateur Polo Championships in Santa Barbara, California. Okay. And yes, I do mean real polo on horseback. Yeah, which is absolutely one of the most challenging things I've done in my life. Hitting a ball off the back of a galloping horse that's bouncing along the ground is one of the hardest things in sports, period. People want to say it's a baseball. They're not running at the damn ball as it's flying through the air, trying to hit it.
And on top of that, we're talking off air, you've had some pretty cool and amazing adventures as well. You spoke about a particular wedding that you happened to, well, I want to say gate crash, but you were invited guest. But
no, I was not invited. I actually went to jail for trespassing.
Oh, really?
I parachuted into Elizabeth Taylor's last wedding to Larry Fortensky on Michael Jackson's Neverland estate in Solvang, California. And that would have been in the early 90s, I think 93, when this happened. And it was a bit of a media event because they didn't let anybody else on site except one photographer from People magazine.
Yep.
So it became a bit of a media frenzy. When I parachuted into the estate, I had to jump through a ring of 21 helicopters.
Oh,
in order to make this skydive. Yeah. And I met with all the pilots ahead of time and they were making jokes about it. I said, you don't want me hitting your blades. It's not going to help you either. So pay attention. I landed about 8 feet behind the last row of guests at the wedding and was arrested I was accosted by the Israeli Mossad, who had been hired for security.
Oh,
they were not pleased. They were not pleased with me. They were trying to, hurt me. There was also the local sheriff's department that was there, and they kind of took charge of me and hauled me away. But not before I, got some images of the crowd and the wedding party. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, this kind of a long, drawn out but interesting story. I didn't know anything about this until 2 days before the wedding, and a buddy of mine who's with ABC News at the time called me up and said, "Hey, nobody can get in. Pictures could be worth real money." And I put it together in 2 days. I found a pilot, and I actually had a camera that I jumped with, but I knew I wasn't going to get, they weren't going to let me leave with any film.
Yes, I was wondering, they're gonna take it off here. So did you have a body cam or something? Or?
I had a camera on my helmet. I had a video camera mounted on my helmet, and what I did is I had a microwave transmitter system that I mounted on my chest, and then I had people on the ground who captured the images from that transmission while I was in, under canopy in free fall.
Yeah.
Because I knew I wasn't getting away. They weren't going to let me take stuff. They actually cut the lines off my parachute, which was stupid since it just disconnects, but they wanted to hustle me away.
Well, I think there's a lot of good insights in that as well. And I want to talk about your skydiving because obviously it's a metaphor that you use in life. And I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm going to declare a great fear of heights. I'm the guy that, I'd be out of the plane and, as you said off air, you can't get back in once you're out. So I'd be the guy trying to scramble back in or resisting to the nth degree. I go to high-rise balconies and I can't walk near the balcony. I have to kind of go, oh, that's enough, I'll go back inside.
Yeah, fear of heights really isn't a factor in skydiving. Are you afraid to fly? Most people who are afraid of heights are not afraid to fly.
No.
It's the same thing. The difference is when you're up in an airplane, or if you're jumping out of it or riding in a hot air balloon or anything like that, where you're high up in the air, the ground becomes two-dimensional. It's like looking at a picture on a wall. There's nothing between you and that image of the ground. to give you any depth perception. So you can't really tell how far away it is. You just know intellectually that it's, you're high up, but it's not visceral.
Yes.
And so it doesn't really bother you. A fear of flying has more to do with a fear of confined space or a lack of control.
Yes.
Neither of which I particularly like. I'm a commercial pilot and I like flying, but when I ride commercial, I hate it. Hate being locked up in the back of that tube. Don't like being treated like cattle, just like everybody else. Hate it.
Yeah.
But I'm not particularly fearful of it. I just feel like I'm afraid of being bored to death.
Well, that's probably fair enough.
The fear of heights thing doesn't really come in. Now, there's plenty of things to get anxious about skydiving. I'm not going to lie. Everybody gets anxious, at least in the beginning, but it's not a fear of heights. But when you get up there and you're going to, you've been through a bunch of training and getting ready to make your first jump, when that door opens and you start moving towards it, it all gets very real. And it's loud. The air is blowing around. You will be anxious, but most people do it. It's rare, really, that anybody backs out of making their first jump once they reach that point where it's time to go. It's because there isn't really time to do anything about it. It's, when it's time, it's time. It's right now. Things are happening.
Wow.
And you're ready. You've had a chance to be psychologically prepared and intellectually prepared to do this.
So when we were talking earlier, you spoke about skydiving being a great metaphor for life, taking that leap of faith.
Right.
Of course, when people think about skydiving, everyone focuses on the jump.
Right.
And then there's a before section and an after section as well. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the before section because, I think, what you've shared so well in your keynote speeches and your book, which is called Leap Forward, which for anyone who wants to get a copy, please go to scottkharris.com and grab a copy there or on Amazon. But what's really interesting is the preparatory phase and getting clear about all the things that need to happen beforehand, before the leap itself. So I wondered if you could talk about how that experience of skydiving is the metaphor that you're talking about. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Any challenge that you face, you're going to think about it ahead of time. You're going to think about, what you have to do and to do the things that you have to prepare to have a good outcome. And, when you're talking about, jumping out of an airplane, you're going to, you have to make sure your gear is ready. You have to pack your parachute. You have to have a plan of what you're going to do, and you think about it. And, when you're riding up in the airplane, you think about your emergency procedures. You put your hands on your handles. If something goes wrong with your main parachute, what are you going to do? Are you going to, you're going to assess the problem. You're going to disconnect the main parachute and open your reserve. And, if you get out and when it opens, if you open up and you're in the wrong position or the wrong place, where are you going to fly your parachute to get a good landing? And you think about all the what ifs and all the things that could go wrong all the way up until that last moment when you leave the airplane. When your foot leaves the door of the airplane, you're no longer thinking about any of that. You're 100% in the moment. And this is how skydiving changed my life. It taught me to focus all of my consciousness on one specific thing with absolute focus, just like transcendental meditation teaches you. And I learned through experience to apply that to other aspects of my life. So, and it's very empowering. But when your foot leaves the door of the airplane, all you're thinking about is what you're doing, what's happening right now. Your bills don't matter. Your, issues with your spouse, they just don't matter. You're not even aware of them. Your money problems don't exist. You're not aware of them. You're only aware of what's right in front of you at that moment in time. And it is so cathartic to find any way where you can absolutely wipe your consciousness of all that other crap and just focus on what's in front of you.
Is that what you meant early in the conversation when you said that became the drumbeat for your life? Is that what
Yes.
you're referring to there?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I learned that I really thrive on an environment where I have accepted a challenge and I reach the point where I draw a line in the sand and I'm not second guessing that anymore. I'm taking this on. I embrace that challenge, and then I only focus on what I have to do to overcome that, or to advance my abilities or my performance to overcome what it is that whatever challenge that I've accepted. And that is the drumbeat of my life. It doesn't really matter what the challenge is. I learned to become a pretty good cook. That's a challenge. It's not quite as exotic as jumping out of airplanes, but it's the same thing. I'm a very accomplished commercial pilot. I do lots of things that I've applied these same principles to, and anyone can do this. You don't have to jump out of an airplane to learn how to focus, but you do have to practice focusing to learn how to focus.
It's a really interesting thing, because one of the things about focus, and I'm dating myself for a moment, Scott, but one of the things I feel, perhaps in my own life as much as anything, is the ability to focus is something that's become a little harder with modern technology, lots of distraction, and so on and so forth. Now, I like technology. I'm relatively competent at using it. I'm not a Luddite in any sense, but I do see that in my own world that sometimes I found it hard to focus and concentrate on things like I used to be able to. Now I'm getting better at it again because I've learned some things. I wanted to ask you, A, whether you had experienced anything of that nature, or whether you've observed anything in other people around that. But B, for those people that might struggle with the concept of focusing, which sounds like a funny thing. It's almost like saying, I struggle with the concept of breathing. I mean, it should be a normal, natural process, shouldn't it? But maybe it is, and maybe it's something we can continue to learn. How would you, or what have you learned about learning to focus?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. I think everyone, including myself, it's much more easy. We're much more easily distracted because we're now living in an environment. We have so much coming at us all the time and it's from all kinds of different sources. And it's very easily to become distracted by all that. Because many of those things matter. And it's very hard to cut yourself off from input, which is what you have to do. If you're really focused on something, you have to exercise tremendous self-discipline to not be distracted by other things until you're, ready to move away, to shift your focus. But if you're really trying to do your very best at anything, you have to be able to focus all of your resources on that issue. And if you can't, then you're only putting in 80% or 50% of what you can do, what you can bring to that particular problem. Therein lies that it's a trap. You're afraid of a challenge that you're trying to overcome. If it's, expanding your business or bringing in a partner or something else like that. And it makes you, it's scary to do these things. And if you're afraid of doing that and but you don't put 100% of your personal resources into that challenge, then you're not giving it your best and you're not going to get your best outcome. The only way you're going to get your best outcome is if you put 100% of your personal resources to bear upon the problem. And you can't do that if you're being distracted by a bunch of other things. You can't do it if you're being distracted by anything. You have to be able to control your own focus. And it's not easy. It's definitely harder than it used to be because, before we had all these things coming at us all the time, it was a little easier to just, be working on one problem. But the ability to really marshal 100% of your intellect on anything is a skill, is a perishable skill that has to be exercised in order to work when you need it on demand. And it's not something that anybody does naturally. The Dalai Lama maybe, but the rest of us actually have to work at it.
Yeah. I've been reading a couple of books, and one that was recommended to me recently was called Stolen Focus, and it talks about the world of distractions. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because I think you've given the listeners here a really good insight into how to reclaim your focus, and that is removing those inputs, removing those sensory inputs. But I guess the simple fact is we can't go and live in the Himalayas like the Dalai Lama and cut ourselves off from all of our other elements of our life. So in the modern world, apart from really reducing those inputs, do you have any other thoughts about how to improve focus? Because here's what I'm thinking, Scott. This what's prompting me to ask this is I'm thinking that if people can learn this and master this is kind of like one of those big dominoes. If you can knock this big domino over and learn that skill of focusing, and you can marshal your resources and apply that to particular problems or opportunities, then that's going to set you up for tremendous outcomes in your life. And so for me, this feels like a linchpin kind of skill.
It is. It absolutely is. It's proven to be for me in my life. And it is an absolute factor in everyone you see who's phenomenally successful, great athletes, great, anybody who's great at anything. It's because they're OCD, at least about something. They found something they poured all their energy into, and that's how they got great at it. And that's the only way to be great at anything, is to be able to focus 100% of your intellect and all of your resources on something. Now, the truth is to have a balanced life, you can't be like that all the time, and you really wouldn't want to be. If you've ever met anybody who's like that, who's really OCD, they don't have a balanced life. They have a very difficult life because they can't shift gears, and they have difficulty in their personal relationships, which are having a lot of love and good connections to other human beings in your life is really some of the most important parts of life. But success in society or in anything that you do is really based on being able to cut that off and not be distracted by all these other things, and be able to focus all of your resources on one particular thing. The way that I think that's best to do this is to pick something. At some point in your life, pick something that you're going to do this with, where you're going to pour everything you got into it at certain times, and teach yourself to ignore everything else. But it doesn't have to be 24/7. You have to pick and choose the times when you're going to have this laser focus, and you're going to ignore everyone and everything else as much as you can. Because if you learn to turn this on and off, you can learn to turn it off at will. And that in doing so, it becomes a more powerful tool. Somebody who's always focused, they're cut off from an awful lot of society and life. And most of us don't want that and wouldn't know what to do with it. Hopefully we grow up to be balanced, individuals. And we have, we do multiple things, and we have, things that are in our life that don't require 100% of our intellect. If it took all of my energy to communicate with my wife, I think that would be difficult. I like that it's more relaxed. And I think most people would agree that that's a better way of dealing with an awful lot of aspects of life. But if you can't focus all of your energies ever, you're always going to be operating at the 50% or lower level. And that's going to affect your performance and your opportunities.
I really love that. And I think, again, ladies and gents, if you've been listening to our conversation for the last few minutes and what Scott's been sharing about focus, I really believe that in business, it is a superpower. I think it is an absolute superpower to be able to be clear about what your objective is or where you're going to put your energy, and to actually go ahead and do that. What I would like to just talk about for a moment, Scott, is because we've kind of spoken about that moment where you've left the aircraft and you're now thinking about nothing else other than what's in front of you. Your energy, your focus is on just what's in front of you, as you've said. And we've spoken about how to develop that focus, and we've spoken that it's a really important big domino to be able to help people achieve success in whatever element of their life. But as you've said, it's not what you want to have in all elements of your life all the time. What I wanted to do was to step back about the preparation thing, because one of the things that we talk about in dentistry, and I know you grew up in a dental family, your dad's an orthodontist, your uncle's a dentist. One of the things, the journeys that we take, the clients that we work with, the journey we specifically take them on is how do they create a business that has more leverage so they can reclaim some of their time, so they're not on the tools all day, every day. They get to have more balance in their life and so on. But that requires a shift in business model. It requires some new learnings. It requires some new skill sets because, as we've discussed, no one ever teaches business. No one ever teaches management at university. These are all skills that need to be acquired once you've got your practicing certificate. So I wanted to ask you about the preparation phase, about planning the journey, because you've been on many journeys. You've learned skydiving, you've learned to fly, you've learned to cook, you've learned, all of those sorts of things. And I'm thinking there's a source code somewhere under that there's an operating system, whether it's conscious or unconscious, in your planning process. And I'm curious to understand your planning process that occurs before you take the leap.
Sure. And you're absolutely right. And in order to learn a new skill or to, go on a new endeavor, you have to think about, what it's really going to take when you're trying to decide to do it. You have to do enough research and planning to decide, what is this really going to take? How much of my time is it going to take? What do I have to learn? What skills do I have to acquire in order to be able to do this? And how much is that going to impact me? When you talk about expanding your business or change it or, building a business that you don't have the skills to do, to begin with, what do you have to do to be able to do that? What do you have to learn? How are you going to learn it? Where are you going to get, what research do you have to do? What advice are you going to have to get? What classes are you going to have to take? You have to figure that out and give yourself a realistic idea of how big that commitment is. And then add 50% and say, okay, for the next, 6 months, I'm going to be absent from an awful lot of other things. I'm going to, if I commit to this gets 100% of my focus, and I'm going to, maybe you're going to close your practice on Fridays, and you're only going to practice Monday through Thursday, and Fridays you're going to spend, working on expanding your business and most of your weekends. Some kind of decision like that has to be made. You have to be realistic about what it's going to take for you to give your very best of yourself to the challenge that you're facing. And then when you decide that, when you figure out what that realistically is, and then you make the decision to move on it, you have to draw a line in the sand mentally in your own head. When I cross this line, it's done. All I'm going to do is focus on what I have to do. I'm not going to second guess myself anymore. I'm not going to think about, well, I can put this off. I can do this. There's no later. There's none of that anymore. When you walk across that line and you decide that you're going to move on this decision, then you focus on what's in front of you and what you have to do. And you commit to that until you have mastered that. Once you obtain that mastery of what it takes to overcome the challenge before you, then it's easy. Then you can back off and then you have control over it. But until you have that mastery, it has to get your full commitment to acquiring that. And there's peace in accepting and embracing that challenge. It's like, well, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not, when somebody asks you if you're going to do something else, if you're going to compete in a golf tournament or some other goofy thing that's just for recreation, you don't have to think about it because you've already decided you're not doing that stuff until you've accomplished this goal that you've set for yourself. You're going to do what that takes. That's going to take precedence until you have accomplished your mastery of that challenge. And then you can look for the next challenge because it's fun. There's no greater joy than performing at your highest level. There is no greater joy in life than really knowing that you have accomplished the best that you can at anything.
I really love that. And I the reason this resonates very strongly with me, and I suspect it will resonate with a lot of people, listening to this podcast, is in the world where we're trying to do ever more. We're trying to, learn this skill, do this, and in dentistry, could be learning orthodontics, implants, high-end cosmetic dentistry, all of those sorts of things, or even in business, how do I learn to market my practice? How do I learn to build a team? All those sorts of things. I've been guilty in the past, and I'm getting better at it now, but I've been guilty in the past of trying to do everything all at once. And I think what I'm hearing from you, and certainly what I've had to learn in myself, is to pick one thing and to go deep on that one thing, to commit to that, to focus on that, but also to be okay to get that bit of reality, as you said, and go, I'll pick up the other opportunities or challenges when I've mastered this first one and go on a different journey for that. I'm not trying to go on 3 or 4 journeys all at once. Is that something that you're really trying to communicate as well?
Absolutely. If any, the old adage is anything worth doing is worth doing well. Anything worth doing, if you can't give it 100% of your best, isn't worth doing. If you're capable of doing anything well, doing anything mediocre is going to be very disappointing.
Yeah.
It's never going to satisfy you. Once you've accomplished anything of import in life, you're never going to be satisfied with a lesser performance. So you have to know that about yourself to begin with and commit to the higher level performance at anything you choose to accept. And if you can't commit to your very best at anything, then don't take it on. It's not worth it. It's devastating, to accept poor performance. It just is. There's nothing worse in life than, than feeling like you haven't accomplished the best that you can. There's nothing more tragic than a person who's not living up to their own potential. And it isn't just in an overall sense. It's every time you face something, if you can't face any particular challenge and live up to your own potential for that challenge, it's depressing because you haven't done your best.
I think there's so much value in that. So ladies and gents, please heed that. I think there's some really, really good things in there about levels of mastery. And of course, this is primarily a business podcast, but the same applies for your clinical work. But for the practice owners here, I would really encourage you to really commit to mastering business. Yeah, to really commit to mastering at least one element of your business. Even maybe it's around team, maybe it's around marketing, maybe it's around finance, whatever it happens to be. I'm always fascinated by people that find themselves in a business environment. They own a business of some description or another. They're usually either technically very competent at what they do. Maybe they're dentists, maybe they're lawyers, maybe they're carpenters or builders, whatever it happens to be, but they're not interested in the business side of things. And it always surprises me because, to me, if you're going to go into business, you want to have an innate curiosity and fascination about business. And yet, I've learned that not everyone does. And so maybe...
Not everyone does.
Not everyone does, right?
Most people really aren't cut out to be in business for themselves. They're really not.
Yeah.
And it's fine. It's really important to realize that for yourself and then just plan to not do it because it's not worth it. If you don't love what it takes to be in business for yourself, don't do it. You won't like it because when you're in business for yourself, guess what? You work 24/7, period. No, there's no other way around it. There's no other way of thinking about it. You can plan to take a day off and do something, but guess what? It disappears. And a dental or orthodontic, any kind of dental specialty practice, you can't leave for more than a few days at a time, ever.
Yeah.
That's it. And if you don't like it, that's, it's not for you. You need to be in a consortium or clinic type environment and be happy with that.
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
And let somebody else worry about the business end.
Yeah.
And that's a great situation for people who don't have a curiosity or the drive to be in business for themselves and don't like the business aspect. It's a tough business. It's a volume business. And if that faucet slows down, it can be devastating because the overhead is high. You have to constantly feed it.
I want to touch on your upbringing around your dad's orthodontic practice because the audience. I know you also work with dentists as well. And so you know the industry, the profession intimately. And the thing I really like about that is it intimately without having been in it. if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's a little strange, but when I was in high school, I worked for my dad. He was an orthodontist. I developed his film. I made his appliances. I made bite plates and headgear and stuff like that. I worked with models and stuff like that. I didn't work with patients, but I did all that stuff in the laboratory and stuff like that, and assisted his nurses. And then later on, when I got out of the Army, the first job I took on while I was going to college is I built him a new office. And then I subsequently built offices for all his dentist buddies in town, or remodeled their existing offices. And I learned a lot about the peculiarities of a dental office and some of the things they needed as a building structure. I am an engineer by that's just who I am. I've always been fond of saying engineers are born, not made. You just learn some tricks along the way. But I've been a builder and an engineer all my life. I inspect commercial property, usually for people who are buying it, and I occasionally get to inspect dental offices. And I have clients who are expanding, and they go from a small office to a bigger one with more people working in it, and consortiums and clinics and that sort of thing. It's fun for me because every time I walk in, if I smell that, I get a whiff of acrylics, and it just feels like home to me.
Yeah, then come the head spins. What I would love to be able to ask you is if you were to reflect on your dad's orthodontic practice, his own orthodontic journey, and I understand and accept that the environment and times in which he was practicing predominantly are very different to today, right? So we understand,
yes.
We accept that. However, it's still small to medium enterprise. What I'd really love to understand is if you could take adult Scott's wisdom and implant it back into young Scott working with dad in the practice, what would you have whispered into your dad's ear and said, hey, Dad, there might be a better way here?
I think he tried to do too much. My dad was a very hard worker. He saw about 35 patients a day. Yeah. 35 to 40 patients a day, every day, which is a lot. He kept 5 chairs going all day long. Yeah. Nobody waited around in his waiting room. He was very efficient. He trained his staff really well. He had really good staff, and that was a big part of his practice. The biggest mistake he made is he didn't value his staff enough. He had people work for him for a number of years, and they eventually, towards the end of his career, basically mutinied and left.
Oh, wow.
And it was devastating to him.
Yes.
He had to get new people, train them all, and he had to do everything himself. He was probably 70 at that point. He practiced until he was about 76. His father was also a dentist. My grandfather was Samuel Harris, basically the creator of pediatric dentistry. He started a museum for dentistry, and after when he passed away. So it's generational.
You broke the mold, though. You broke the mold.
But the truth is that's really the only mistake he made. My dad was a really good businessman. The only place he fell short is he didn't manage his people well, and it cost him. And if I could tell him anything, I said, look, when you get somebody who's well trained and they're doing good work, you need to pay them what they're worth.
Yeah.
You need to not just look and see what somebody else is paying across the street. You need to actually consider what that person's value is to your business and pay them accordingly. That would have made his last 8 to 10 years in practice a lot more pleasant. And it probably would have made all of it more pleasant because his staff would have been a lot more happier, and just, would have been a nicer environment all the way around.
Ladies and gents, if you've just been listening to this episode of the show, I'd really love you to rewind about 35, 40 seconds and just play that on continuous loop, because I think that's a common trap. We do get caught up with looking at what someone across the road is being paid and thinking that that's the benchmark. But, I guess the consideration is, what's it going to cost me in terms of lost opportunity if they leave, headaches, lost revenue, the training burden, and even the difficulty of finding someone in today's market to be able to bring them in the first place. So if you've got good people on your team, they are great assets for the business, and we want to look after them, and we want to be able to remunerate them in a way that is, commensurate with the value, not just what's what the market across the road is paying. So I love that point, and please heed that. I think that's a really valuable piece that Scott shared there. Scott, as you think about your own experiences in business and your own thoughts about dentistry, and again, could be small business in general, what sort of advice or thoughts would you like to leave our audience with? If we could have a billboard in Portland, Oregon, and we had, as you're driving down the main highway, we had the Gospel according to Scott, the Book of Scott, we'll call it. What would be the couple of key salient pieces or words of advice you think that really every business owner just needs to know?
Never get comfortable. Always look forward. Always strive to improve. Whatever you're doing, do better tomorrow. Constantly work to do better. Never be satisfied with whatever you're doing, no matter how successful you are. If you stagnate, you'll fail, and you won't see it coming.
That is really powerful. Really powerful. I think that's what we'd officially call in the podcast or the mic drop moment. And I don't really want to add anything much to that because I want to let that settle in people's minds. I think there's just some pearls of wisdom. We're going to have to call you the oyster. The oyster from Portland is just producing pearls, because those really are valuable, and thank you, Scott.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gents, I think we can all agree that Scott's been a tremendous guest today. I have read a lot of the stuff on Scott's website and really encourage you to head across to scottkharris.com. There's blogs, there's podcasts, there's speaker reels, and there's, of course, a great book called Leap Forward. And I'd really encourage you to get a copy of it. It is going to be a real call to arms, a call to action to take charge of your life, to be moving forward. And as Scott said, to always be taking on the next adventure rather than stagnating. And I think that's going to be a really key and important part for all of us in our life. So again, head across to his website, scottkharris.com, avail yourself of all those resources, and hopefully we can also hear more about the parachuting story into Elizabeth Taylor's wedding. I'm sure there's more to run on that story, Scott.
There is. Oh, for what it's worth, Leap Forward is also available on Audible as an audiobook that was narrated by myself. And personally, I like getting books that are read by the authors, and it's kind of nice because I can emphasize the things that I get passionate about, and it becomes pretty personal.
Well, I think that's great, because I think one of the things you're right is it's one thing to read the words on the page, it's another to hear the author and what they're communicating and conveying. So again, ladies and gents, do yourself a favor and grab a copy of that on Audible, and that'd be terrific. Scott, I'd really like to just express my thanks to you for taking the time out of your afternoon to come and hang out with us. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to come and talk to you. I'm looking forward to seeing some keynotes. I'd love to get you across to Australia at some point and share you.
Oh, that'd be fun. I'll come.
Yeah, cool.
Find me a gig. I'll come.
All right, cool. Well, I reckon we can work on that. But again, I just want to say thank you, mate. You've been incredibly generous with your time today, and I just want to express my heartfelt thanks to you.
Thank you very much. It's been a blast.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.